All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for those of you on Zoom. This is our first wealth building seminar through real estate investing. It's to help those of you who are not investing get started, and then those who maybe have just started dabbling in investing. This is going to help you a little bit with improving what you have going. And then we'll talk later about a more advanced seminar that we'll have later in the year. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tanya Thomsen. I'm the team lead at the Thomsen Team here at Modern Realty Partners. Today we have some amazing experts who are going to share all of their knowledge and experience with you. We're going to start out the agenda with some legal considerations. Attorney Brian Romans will be here for that. We have Miranda Zieg, who's on the team and is an investor. She's going to talk about return on investment. And then afterwards, John Warren and Aaron Zieg, who are loan officers who are also investors, will join Miranda and talk more about the ins and outs of the process, a little bit about property management. And then at the end, we'll wrap it up with how we as realtors can help you achieve your goals in investing. Something to remember, this is intended to be interactive. So if you have questions throughout, please just raise your hand, ask. Those of you on Zoom, we have someone monitoring the chat. So you can enter in the chat, you can raise your hand, whatever. We'll make sure your questions get answered as well. When we are finished, we will have a survey. We've got a paper copy for those of you who are here. We would love your honest feedback. We plan on doing many more of these hybrid seminars throughout the year. Those of you on Zoom, you will be emailed a link to fill out your survey. People in person have a handout right now. Those of you who know attorneys well, they can be a little detailed. So, so their slides are pretty detailed. So everybody after this, everyone in person and on Zoom will get those slides emailed and a document that has live links because there are a number of websites referenced in the attorney's presentation. So I think that's it for now. Take it away, Brian.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So, as Tanya mentioned, attorneys do have a lot of words that we use. Slides are going to be very detailed. Don't hate me, hate my partner, Matt. He put them together. Just the nature of the beast being lawyer. So what I like to do is start off introducing myself, what I do, who I am, so that you get an idea of why you should actually trust what I'm telling you. I am at Crofcheck, Ginsky & Rohr in Brookfield. I've been a partner there since 2012. I've been practicing law for 17 years, just about in May. I'm also the supervising broker, one of the supervising brokers for Modern Realty Partners. So I'm Tanya and Miranda's boss. I also own a title company. So I have been knee deep in real estate law since 2007, working on foreclosures, short sales, replevins, receiverships, all those kind of fun things as it relates to real estate. So I have been doing this for the majority of my legal career, as well as creating business entities and insulating clients from risk. I like to tell people that I'm a conservative lawyer, meaning I'm risk averse. I try to do for my clients what I would do for myself and make it so that you don't call me later saying that you got sued because you took my advice and did something that you shouldn't have done. And so everything that I advise and that Matt advises in our general practice is that we give advice so that you insulate yourselves from liability. Okay. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here today with respect to real estate. How do we insulate ourselves from liability? Let's see. Bottom one. Wake it up. Wake it up. The middle one.
Middle one.
Middle one.
Big button.
Okay. Well, you can just go to the next one. That's fine. I'll let you take that, Brent. Okay, so Matt put this lengthy summary together. He took a lot of information from many different sources. Can you hear me online? Everyone okay? I feel like I feel on the news.
The weatherman.
We went better.
How about we just manually move it forward?
No. Can everyone hear me though online? Is that?
You're good.
Just manually push
your laptop forward. Is that on this one?
No,
There we go.
Okay. As you look at this list, it's very detailed. It takes information from multiple sources related to limited liability companies. For many real estate investors, just because it's cheap, it's easy, it's simple. You go to a website, you create the entity, you make sure the name is there, and then poof, $130 later, you've got an LLC. So it's really easy to use. LLCs were created in about 1990, sometime around that frame. And so early on, the preferred method was to continue to use limited liability partnerships. The partnership law, general partnership law, had been around for a while. It's now been established as LLC law for quite some time. They've adopted a lot of the partnership rules. And so we now have case law, which makes us much more comfortable to recommend using limited liability companies. There are states such as Illinois that have what's called a series LLC. We don't have that here. I bring it up because a lot of commercial lenders and investors will mention a series LLC. A series LLC is just effectively an umbrella LLC at the top with multiple LLCs underneath it for insulation and liability purposes. You buy property in all the lower level LLCs while the upper level LLC kind of manages and oversees everything. We don't have that in Wisconsin. Our code book doesn't allow for that. And so we have to go about creating our own structure very similar to that. And that's kind of what you'll see in our slides. So when you create an LLC, you need to have a lot of different things. You need to have a registered agent, which is somebody within the state of Wisconsin who's simply going to say, I'm here to accept service of process in case any legal documents need to be served on me, letters, correspondence, things like that. You need to have an address where you're located. The principal office, though, does not need to be within Wisconsin, just the registered agent. So a lot of times we have foreign entities which aren't overseas. They're actually just from a different state. We call them foreign entities where they own things in Wisconsin and you just register to do business in Wisconsin. So just a tidbit for you, if you do have real estate in other states, you should be registering your entities in other states so that you're authorized to do business and transact business in those states. Illinois, for one, is very particular about getting their tax, so they really want you to do that. So I'm not going to go through the slides. You can read those on your own. I don't like to give that type of a presentation. But when you create your LLCs, many instances you're going to have a single member or husband and wife, which is effectively considered a single member because you're married and it's disregarded for tax purposes. So when you create the LLC, in order to have the protections of an LLC, you have to follow corporate formalities, meaning you have to have annual meetings. You have to file an annual report. You have to file tax returns or at least report the income on behalf of the LLC, even if it flows through to your individual tax return. You have to market as an LLC. Your contract should have the LLC designated. If you don't do that, then they can do what's called pierce the corporate veil, which means they can get into the individual members of the LLC, okay? We don't want that to happen. It defeats the purpose of setting up the LLC, but remember, following the corporate formalities is the only thing that's going to protect you as you go forward. Doesn't have to mean your annual meeting has to be exactly when your operating agreement says it should be. Doesn't mean you have to follow every single corporate formality, but you have to follow the majority of the formalities with tax returns, marketing efforts, things like that. And the reason that's important is because you want your LLC to insulate you. When you buy real estate and you have real estate, owning it in an LLC is going to insulate you as an individual member of that LLC if you follow the formalities. Here's the example. Classic example is college campus. You own a rental property, you rent it to a bunch of college kids. We all know college kids don't treat things very well. They have big college parties, they overload the weight capacities of the decks outside, and all of a sudden that deck comes down and collapses. Who's responsible? So our model and what we tell everybody is we're in America. You can sue anyone for anything at any time for any reason. It is what it is. That's where we live. So the best way to protect yourselves is to hold that real estate in an LLC or another entity that's going to protect you from personal liability. What I mean is, we don't want anyone to get sued individually because they own a rental property and someone got severely hurt or killed. So you hold everything in this LLC. That's the classic example. Someone is overloading a deck, it falls and collapses. It happened in Chicago probably about a decade ago. It was all over the news. Not a good story. And you want to make sure that you have everything protected. So what happens when you have it in the LLC? They sue the property owner. So if you hold the real estate in your individual names and you have an LLC that does all your leasing, you've done half the work. Okay? Your LLC that's leasing everything is going to be named, but also the property owners, because you're the one who is supposed to maintain the real estate. So we want to make sure that we have an LLC that owns the real estate, and then we typically recommend having an LLC run all of the operations. So 2 LLCs to start. As you get going forward and you continue down your investment path, you typically acquire more and more real estate. What happens then, to create more of that series approach, the umbrella approach, we recommend having multiple LLCs. Those LLCs will have different properties in it based upon your risk tolerance. If you don't really care and you say, I have enough risk tolerance where I can put 4 or 5 LLCs into one, or 4 or 5 properties into one LLC, and I will be okay if something really bad happens at one of those properties, knowing that if I get sued, they can get all the assets of this LLC, which includes my other 4 properties, then you're fine. If you don't have that risk tolerance and you say, I don't want any of my investments to be able, something bad at one of my investments to be able to pierce anything at my other investments, then you create an LLC for each of them. Yes, it's more paperwork. It's a balancing act. How many tax returns do I want to file? How many annual reports do I want to file? How much insurance do I want to get? But as you get more and more into the bigger commercial unit properties, the bigger residential unit properties, you're going to want to consider that, because you don't want to have one property bring down your whole empire. Okay. So the multi-member LLC, that's the one I'll talk a little bit about as far as operating agreement. In Wisconsin, the law changed. We don't need an operating agreement now. It can be in writing or it can be oral, kind of a general practice. How do we do things? If you're husband and wife, or if you're a single member, it doesn't matter, because you know how you're doing things. Just know that you're going to be subject to whatever the state laws are related to LLCs. When you have other people that are joining you in your investments, that's when you really want to figure out, okay, what the heck's going on here? And how are we going to document that? And you're going to want to get an operating agreement in writing. In operating agreements, it talks about who the owners are, who's the decision maker. Sometimes it's only one person out of 3. One person gets to decide all the day-to-day stuff. We call them the managing member. Sometimes it's all 3. They all want to have an equal say. Sometimes we have provisions in there that talk about, well, what happens if one of these guys wants out or doesn't like a particular investment that we have in this LLC? How do we get them out? What if they want to sell on their own to someone else that we don't want to be a partner with? So within that LLC operating agreement, we will have restrictions on transfer, things of that nature that will restrict how those shares get transferred, what value gets assigned to them. Is it the book value? Is it an independent appraisal? Well, now you're getting into the weeds, but at the same time, you've got a lot of expense that could come about just because one of your partners isn't happy with a piece of real estate. You could have to pay $1,600 for an appraisal of that commercial real estate. You could have to pay an attorney. You could have to pay a business valuation expert to assess the value of that membership interest. So it gets more complicated as you add more people trying to get pieces of the pie. So just understand that as you start growing, it's more and more important to have multi-layer LLCs and if you have a multi-member LLC to follow that corporate formality. Okay. One of my good friends who's turning 50 is at a law firm downtown, and their motto is aggravated litigation. And so they will just nitpick every little thing, and they're very good at what they do. They know the law. They're very technical, and I don't want to go up against them. And so I always envision them on the other side of me. So when I say follow your corporate formalities, if you have multi-members that aren't family related, I mean it, because those are the kinds of guys that come in like bulls in a china shop and just destroy everything that you've built. So real estate is very lucrative, and these guys will get into some of that stuff later.
The positives.
The positives about real estate, yeah, look, I get it. My job is to be the wet blanket on your Saturday morning, and then they're gonna give you all the rainbows and unicorns. So, let's go to the next slide, so. But in all honesty, you want to protect yourself with some sort of entity. If you have a takeaway from today, protect yourself with an entity, whether it's an LLC or something else, so that you aren't going to risk being sued for your personal assets, right? That's the biggest thing is I don't want to be sued for my personal assets. Have enough insurance in place to cover the value of what you've got there, and then some. Umbrella policies are relatively cheap, usually a couple $100 on top of an underlying commercial policy. So look into that as well. And as a lawyer, you know, my job really is to guide you and be a resource for the process. I'm throwing a lot at you today. I understand that. But I can't tell you the last residential lease that I've actually drafted. Okay. I give my clients the information they need to be successful in the business so they can go out and do it. And then if they have questions along the way, that's when they call me. Okay, I don't draft residential leases because my rate is $395 an hour. And Tanya's gonna get a really hefty bill after this. But the reason being, I don't want you to come to me for one residential lease and then never come back. Okay, I can draft it, yes. But there are folks at Wisconsin Legal Blank. The attorney that heads it up is Tristan Pettit. I know him well. I've reviewed the lease. I've reviewed the documents he puts out there. And so I send my clients there and they're always confused. Why are you sending me to Wisconsin Legal Blank? Well, because I know you can get what I could do for $20. Or you could buy the whole package of landlord tenant documentation for $180. Okay, something like that, right? It doesn't make sense for me to draft the lease for you or the ancillary documents unless you have a particular situation. And if you do, we'll talk about it. But I'm always going to send my clients to resources that I think are going to be most helpful for them. Matt did a good job when he put this together of putting those resources in one place for you. There's links, there's websites identified, and if you can't access them or if you have other questions, just reach out to us, okay? That's what we're here for. The other one he's got on there is landlord training. Milwaukee offers that. If you there's also a landlord handbook that's put out by in Madison. So there are resources for you to have that kind of walk you through the process. So all of that's there. I'm not going to draft your lease for you because I'm too busy and because it's a lot cheaper and more cost effective for you to do that elsewhere. But what I do want to be is a resource for you when you run into those problems. Okay. These guys will tell you about return on investment. They'll tell you about where the money comes and all the things that you need to anticipate from a financial perspective when buying real estate. Sometimes that goes wrong. Okay. We have a bad tenant. We need to kick them out. Okay. Here's where I see landlords lose their ass because they had a bad tenant. Okay. They don't call me soon enough. They think they can handle it on their own. So they send notices out. They get notices from Tristan, but they don't necessarily fill them out the correct way, or they don't serve them the correct way. And then they call me and say, I need to file an eviction action, and they haven't paid me rent in 6 months. And I said, okay, well, your notice is wrong. We have to reserve. And then we have to wait the necessary period of time, whether you're terminating a tenancy for 28-day notice or whether it's a 5-day notice to pay rent or quit. We still have to restart that and reserve it. And then they tell me they're in Milwaukee County, which is notorious for being slow as molasses. Okay. So now they get mad at me because they waited 6 months to come to me for the first conversation. And now they're 9 months down the road and they have a $5,000 attorney fee bill because the tenant showed up and said, had all these defenses to the service, the notice. And then they dispute the allegations of the complaint saying they weren't late in rent and all that kind of stuff. So my job is to be a resource as you go through that process. Okay. Get your leases, get your entity signed up. But as you have questions, if someone's not paying, if something's out of the ordinary, how much can I have on an application fee? How much do we have to charge for a credit check? What happens when we get the credit check? Do I have to give a copy to them? Right? Those are the types of questions that I would expect a lot of these resources to answer for you. But I don't want you to find yourself in a position where you can't answer that you've followed those specific rules. Okay. Landlord tenant law in Wisconsin is very tenant friendly. Okay. You cannot withhold money for attorney's fees from a security deposit. Your lease cannot say that you want to withhold money or that the tenant has to pay your attorney's fees, okay? I have a lot of people try to put things in their lease because they think they're gonna be smarter than lawyers. And then all of a sudden I have to tell them their lease is void. You cannot enforce your lease. And the worst part about it is a tenant can actually enforce your lease against you as long as they're current. You can't enforce it against them as long as they're paying their rent, but they can enforce it against you. So it's a big problem. So that's why I say use trusted sources. Don't just Google things. Don't do home brain surgery. Give me a call. Go to Wisconsin Legal Blank, and I'm not getting paid by Wisconsin Legal Blank at all. I just have reviewed their forms and know what they say. So I'm confident telling you to go there. Now we get to the big bad federal government, right? The Corporate Transparency Act. This was enacted last year, became effective January 1st, applies to any type of business entity, okay? There's a lot of question about this act. We won't get into the political side about whether the government needs all of your information. I'm not here to dispute that or get into a fight about that. I'm just here to tell you what it says, okay? Currently, the Corporate Transparency Act says that beneficial owners of LLCs, of corporate interests, so shareholders, members, all those kind of people have to give their information to FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, okay? And you have to do it within a certain period of time or face civil penalties up to like $519 a day, okay? The goal, they want to stop shell corporations, money laundering, all that kind of stuff. The way I see it is it's the federal government being lazy. They have all this information because when you have an LLC, that information is filed on your tax return. It hits them, it hits the IRS. So they have all the information. It's just in all their systems and they don't want to call that information. So they give it back to all of us and say, you have to do this. And if you don't, we're going to fine you. Okay. That's where we're at. Okay. The circuit or the Court of Appeals in Alabama has found that the Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional, and so that is making its way. You'll likely see it hit the Supreme Court of the US soon. But that doesn't stop us from having to file. It only stays filing by members of the National Small Business Association. So if you don't know what that is, you're not a part of it, meaning you still have to file. So what they ask for, driver's license, and all information related to anyone who has an ownership interest in the LLC. Okay, I'll leave it at that. This one's a little bit more technical. You can do it on your own. You can have us help you do it, stuff like that. But just know that if you created your LLC before 2024, you have through the end of this year to file. So if you want to wait and see how everything pans out with the Supreme Court, you're welcome to do so before you give all your information to the federal government. Or if you created your entity in 2024, you have 90 days. So just know that those deadlines exist, and you don't want to be facing the penalties if you don't have to. More links, more information about Corporate Transparency Act, all in there in Matt's slides. He tried to do a really good job and put all of that out there for you to review. But for the most part, and I'll give you a little bit of legalese to leave you with and to bore you. The reason the federal government is doing this is because they want the information to protect what they believe to be money laundering from a lot of shell companies. A lot of us aren't doing that. We're just creating these entities to insulate ourselves from liability. And to do that, we file all of our information with the state. That's how it is across the country. The secretaries of state handle all of the business registrations. And so the fight in Alabama about the constitutionality says all of this is the state's problems and not the federal government's problems. And so federal government, you can't overreach. That's what they're saying. Okay, so when you see it all pan out, you heard it here first. That's what they're talking about. But I don't like to leave everyone on a boring note like that. So if there is anything that you do have questions about, again, use myself, use Matt as a resource. Let me know if you have questions now. We can take those.
Just to recap.
Yeah.
The LLC has to reside in the state of the rental property, but your address can be where you live physically.
Repeat the question for the Zoom people, please. Repeat this.
Yeah, so the question is relates to where the LLC has to be registered and where you have to have a registered agent or what. Yeah, okay. If you create an LLC, the LLC can own things anywhere. Okay, so my LLC that I create in Wisconsin can own property in Illinois. But if I own property and do business in Illinois, I have to register my LLC in Illinois as a foreign entity so that I have a presence in Illinois for someone to serve. Okay. My principal office, though, where I do business is here in Wisconsin. I don't go to Illinois. Okay, but I have property in Illinois. I personally don't, but in my example, I do. So my principal office would stay wherever I am doing business, but I need someone designated as a registered agent who can accept legal service in Illinois. So that wouldn't be me because I don't have a local presence in Illinois. So they have companies out there that will do that. Okay, in Wisconsin, to bring it back home, many people use a service company in Madison. I think they're terrible. They don't get information to you timely. And so I would recommend either using your attorney, your accountant, or your own address that's not the property. Okay, because if you use the property address as the registered office, they are going to go to that property address and try to serve you. And you won't be there.
One question.
Yeah.
And this is probably very naive. I'm trying to imagine, let's say today I have the LLC in place,
Mhm.
right? What would be the worst case scenario for me that the sue happened?
If somebody sued you and you have an LLC,
Yeah,
is your property in the LLC?
that's it, right?
That's it. It's just in the LLC. Okay.
Okay.
Worst case scenario for you is you don't have enough insurance for the LLC. And you have multiple accidents happen at the same time, meaning it's not just one person that falls and hurts themselves. It's a whole deck collapsing and everybody falling and dying. Okay, let's just assume mass casualty, everybody fell and died. Okay. Your LLC, you didn't follow corporate formalities. So all you did was create the LLC to hold the real estate. You've never filed a tax return. You've never held a meeting. You don't advertise anything, all that kind of stuff. Now they're going to try and pierce that to get to you personally.
Okay,
That's the worst case scenario.
okay. Gotcha.
Yep.
Let's say I do all the tax filing, I have insurance.
Yeah.
And then they sue me, so.
So they wouldn't sue you. They wouldn't sue you individually, right?
LLC.
They'd sue the LLC, right? They might try to sue you, but you would then file a motion to dismiss the case against you because you aren't individually on anything. Okay. It's like owning shares of Coca-Cola, right? They're not going to sue all the individual shareholders. They're going to sue Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're going to sue your LLC. Now, if they think you had something to do with it, they'll try to sue you individually as well. But you should have grounds if you follow those formalities to get dismissed from the case.
So the
So-
worst case is, sorry, interrupt you.
I was just going to say, so I can't say that no matter what happens, you won't be personally sued. Okay, there are lawyers who will sue everybody just because and throw it at the wall and see what sticks. But you have much better grounds to get your case dismissed against you individually if you follow all the formalities, have the insurance, have the lease with the
Yeah.
LLC and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for that example, if the LLC only have one property,
Mhm.
so, and I cannot, let's say, I would not get to me personally,
Mhm.
but the worst case for that LLC is the house be taken away, that's. it,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Whatever assets that LLC
The
owns
whole asset.
is
yeah.
what's subject to collection. So if you have insurance in place and it's enough to cover a slip and fall, your insurance will kick in and you're still operating as usual. The worst case scenario is if you followed all the formalities and it stays as a lawsuit only against the LLC would be, I've exhausted all my insurance and they got a judgment for me in excess of what my insurance was. Say your insurance is $1 million. They get a judgment for $1.5 million. They can collect against that real estate.
Yep. thank
They
you.
would sell the real estate, take the real estate, and then you'd say, well, I lost my real estate. But my 5 other real properties that are in these other LLCs are protected and my personal assets are protected. So for that same reason though, as you operate, you don't necessarily want to let all your rents continue to sit in the LLC. Because you want to keep pulling those out to reduce the overall assets that your LLC has, and it's limited to the property. If you put all of your money and just keep it all in there, in the LLC, the problem you're gonna have is the second that something goes wrong and then you pull it all out, you're gonna get a lawsuit filed against the LLC for a fraudulent transfer. You were aware of a creditor collection action against you for X, Y, and Z, and you pull all the money out. So a good practice is to continue to pull that money out and not have a really large operating account.
Go ahead, thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Two questions on the LLC. What happens if you have the mortgage in your name, but the property is titled in the LLC?
Yep.
And as far as tax filings go, many people file LLC held companies on their Schedule E, so there isn't a separate business return or entity on tax returns, but they file everything else.
Yep. I'll answer the first question first. Remember the second in case I forget it, okay? So for everyone on Zoom, the question relates to, the mortgage. If you have a mortgage in an individual name on your property and the property, however, is subsequently owned by the LLC, what happens? Okay, that's a very good question. As a lawyer, I can't tell you to actually violate the terms of your mortgage. So when you transfer a piece of real estate that you own individually into an LLC, that's a technical violation of the terms of your mortgage, the due on sale, due on transfer clause. I can't tell you to do that. What I can tell you though is that people do it all the time. And I can tell you that I've drafted quitclaim deeds for people who I've instructed about it being a technical violation. And they've still asked me to do it regardless of what my advice is, because they know that people do it all the time, okay? Generally speaking, why they do it is because it's a lower interest rate when they buy the property, or maybe they bought the property, have upgraded later in life, and they decide, hey, we're gonna keep it, okay? Bought the residence, it's a smaller starter home, and they wanna rent it out. Now they say, we wanna keep it, but we don't wanna refinance, we don't wanna get a new loan, all that kind of stuff. So what they do is they transfer the property into an LLC by a quitclaim deed. So the LLC then becomes the legal title holder to the property, but the mortgage is still out there in the individual's names. So what happens, right? My practice in 17 years has been, as long as they keep making their mortgage payments, the lender has no reason to go back and investigate that file. And in many instances, the lender's already sold the file on the secondary market and who knows where it is. So as long as the money keeps coming in, they continue to accept those payments and nobody knows anything about it. Okay. If they find out, what happens? They could make you refinance the loan by calling the note due. It can happen. It's out there. It's a technical default. I haven't seen it happen yet. Okay.
Would it allow, so if the mortgage is in your own name, but it's titled in an LLC, that wouldn't give someone a legal out to pierce the LLC veil, correct?
No, correct. They wouldn't be able to pierce the veil as long as you're following the formalities of the LLC, because what happens is when you contract with someone, you're contracting with either an individual or an entity, okay? And that relationship between you and someone else is determined at the time of contract. So if I go and I try to lease my property to someone and I sign that on behalf of my LLC who owns the property, my contractual relationship with that tenant is as an LLC. Okay, so it starts at the time of contract. So where people get in trouble is they don't put LLC on their things, okay? They might say Modern Realty Partners. And then they go ahead and enter into a lease with someone and they just say Modern Realty Partners. Well, my good friend that's a lawyer is going to pick that apart and try to pierce the corporate veil, because he's going to say, yeah, you entered into a contract with me as an individual doing business as Modern Realty Partners. And you're going to say, no, we're an LLC. And the person who contracted with you, the tenant, is going to say, I had no idea. And that's that point when you contract with someone, that's what matters. What's the marketing that they saw? What's the representation that they saw? How was it identified in the initial clause of the contract? Is the lease with someone as an individual, or does it say that it's with an LLC registered in whatever state? Okay, that's what matters. So, good question.
Well,
Question
and
two, I
then
totally
for the
forgot.
tax, for if they file it on a Schedule E tax return.
Oh,
instead
yeah.
of like an LLC, does that give any piercing to the LLC veil?
No, it wouldn't. The question relates to if it's reported on a Schedule E as part of an individual return, and not a separate LLC return, because as a single member, you can report it on your own individual return, okay? You don't have to file a separate LLC return. Would that have any sort of effect on piercing the corporate veil? I'm going to tell you no, because it shouldn't have any effect. And if someone tries to assert that, they're grasping at straws. Okay. And the reason being is because you are reporting the information, you are identifying it as an LLC. But again, it all comes back to how you communicate with the particular entity when you contract. If all of your marketing materials, your business cards, your leases, your online advertising, if all of that identifies the LLC, then you're fine. But the second you start pulling away because it's too long or it doesn't sound cool, you're starting to run into trouble, okay? So the biggest and most important thing is, even if you don't do it on all the marketing pieces, because it's a lot easier to say, you know, your LLC or whatever, without the LLC or limited liability company, I get that. As long as it's in that contract, that's the big one, okay? When you create that relationship with your tenant, it has to say LLC or LLP or corporation, whatever that might be. Anyone else? Good questions.
Got a question on mine.
Okay.
If you have an LLC, prior to getting married, does your spouse own 50% of the LLC once married?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you, I hate family law. The question is, if you have an LLC prior to getting married, does your spouse own half the LLC? After you get married, right? And that's a loaded question. Very loaded, because I don't know all the facts. I'm going to assume no prenuptial agreement saying that they don't. But for general purposes, the answer is they have an equitable ownership interest in the company regardless of what the membership units say. So that's a very legal and technical answer, and I apologize. The only way I can more easily explain it is, even if your operating agreement says they don't own it, they probably have a marital property interest in it and the proceeds from it, unless you specifically excluded it prior to marriage. Because what happens is, and here's why, and I'll get very technical for just a brief moment. What happens is, individual property you bring into a marriage will retain its individual classification so long as you don't commingle. Once you commingle, then it loses its classification. So think of this. You have an individual bank account and everything comes into that bank account. Your wages, your rental income. Well, now you've just commingled those funds, because if you don't have a prenuptial agreement, your wages are 50% yours and 50% your spouse's. And so as far as the law is concerned, we're not going to look at that account and differentiate. We can't pick apart and say, well, this dollar was marital because it was wages and this dollar wasn't because it was rent. So if you commingle, it becomes marital. So yes, there is a way that you can keep it individual property if it retains that classification and there isn't any sort of commingling. But the second you take earned income and use it to pay for anything related to that property, you've converted it. So, good question though.
Cool.
Try to keep things away from your spouse, I get it. All right, any questions that pop up after today? I know it's winded and I know I talked a lot, and these guys are telling me to cut it out. There's a hook coming, I promise. If there's anything that pops up, please feel free to reach out to Matt or myself. We're happy to answer questions just like this, because we'd rather be preventative and not see you facing a lawsuit than having to react to a lawsuit because you did something you shouldn't have done. Okay, and a lot of times it's a 5-minute phone call. We have 15-minute free consultation, so we're not going to charge you for a 5-minute phone call. We only charge when we get really knee deep into things and have to answer a lot of questions or evaluate different situations. So thank you for your time today. Appreciate you all coming today, and hopefully there's another seminar coming up soon.
All right, so if you felt like the helium was deflated out of the balloon because that was scary, I'm about to pump it back up. So I'm Miranda Zieg. I've been on Tanya's team for 9 years. I've been in real estate for 10. But my journey to real estate investing actually started prior to being a realtor. So all of this information that he gave and stuff, really great. I jumped in, like my husband and I, he said, let's own real estate. And I used to be a leasing agent for a very large apartment complex. And I lived at that complex and it sucked and I hated it. And when he said, we're going to do this, I was like, absolutely not. But then when my husband said, well, let's look at the numbers and what we could build in wealth later on, so you don't have to work till you're 70. And then I saw those numbers. I said, okay, I'll do it. So we did, and I'm a control freak, so I took over in the beginning, but then as we kept building properties, then I switched over to management company, which I will talk about that later. But right now, let's start with just the basics. So when you're looking at, like, let's say one of us on the team has you set up on a search and you're looking at properties and you're thinking, oh, this looks nice, I think I might want to purchase it. How do you calculate the numbers? So on the slide here, this is just the easiest, most basic how to get your percentage. So you're taking the monthly rent minus your monthly expenses. That's going to equal your monthly profit. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to take your monthly profit and multiply that by 12 because for 12 months for the year to get your yearly profit. And then you're going to divide that by your initial investment. So that's going to give you your ROI percentage. So that's going to be the money that you put down to purchase the property. And also if there was if you already see some repairs that you may need to make and you have some calculations of what that could cost. So group participation, when we're talking about expenses. So thinking about if you're buying a property, what are going to be some standard expenses that you are going to have as a homeowner?
Water and sewer.
Okay, water and sewer. So yes, your utilities. All right, what's like the easiest one? When you purchase this property, you're gonna end up having a
Mortgage payment.
mortgage. Okay, now, because you own this property, what do you have to pay to the municipality? Taxes. And because if someone slips and falls, what do you also want to have on the property? Insurance. Okay, so these are going to be your general basic ones that you're going to have that you're going to calculate into those monthly expenses. So you're going to have your mortgage payment, which is going to include your taxes and insurance in there. But then yes, utilities. Are you buying a single family home where you can just tell the tenant, hey, you're going to be responsible to pay for this? Okay, now that's not an expense for you. Are you buying a duplex where the meters are not separate, so you have to calculate that like you're paying for it? So those are things that to include. If you're buying a 4-family or more and you need to have a dumpster, then also things you're going to calculate: lawn care, snow removal. Who's doing that? Typically, if you have a single family or duplex, you're probably going to put it on the tenants as part of the lease to have them do it. Bigger the properties, you may contract that out. So those are also expenses. So we're going to do now. Where am I supposed to? Okay. All right. You're going to have to hit me with the next slide. All right. So now we're going to take. These were sales that happened last year, and we're going to look at calculating the ROI on it and determining, is it going to be good buy or bad buy? So initial one here, what we're seeing is that the purchase price is $360,000. Now, so what I'm looking at is this is a traditional, like you already own your home, you've saved up where you're going to need to put 25% down. Now we've got some younger folks here in the audience today, which I love that their parents brought them, because what you may want to consider later on is being the owner where you're living on one side and the rents coming from them are going to help towards it. And you will be offered other benefits because you can go with an FHA financing, which is lower, like less payment. And then that can be a higher ROI when you move out of there. But I'm going to do this as just a traditional, I own a house, this is my first rental property, I'm buying a duplex. Well, I have to put 25% down for conventional financing. So with that, and I pulled a interest rate, yes, you will pay higher in interest rate as an investment property. It's just how it is. So down payment is $90,000. Taxes are $6,107, and the insurance I'm estimating $1,200. Again, that can fluctuate more, but at the time I think I did this, I know that the insurance world's changing right now, so those numbers might be a bit higher now, but anyways, so when we're looking at this, yes.
Can you make it clear to some of the people that it is not $6,100 a month for taxes?
Oh, yes. So,
And insurance?
yeah, so the taxes are $6,107 for the year. And so what you'll see here is I've got the monthly payment, which is including your taxes and insurance, so that breaks down to the 25.43 and 23 cents. But let's look at what the rents are on here. So one unit is getting $13.50, the other's getting $9.50, which only totals $2,300. So right now, our monthly rents are less than what you're not covering the just minimum expenses. And we also don't have water and utilities included in there. So you're at a negative. Each month, you're actually paying money out. So on paper, bad buy. However, things that you are going to look at too is, well, has this been owned for like the last 20 years by the same person and they're just a really nice guy and never raised the rents for those tenants? Are we at market rents? So that's another thing that we're going to look at and consider is say, well, let's check out what other areas of similar square footage, number of bedrooms and bathrooms and upgrades, what are they going for right now? So right now I can tell just from being in the business or been doing this a while that yes, these are under market rents. So we would use things like you could go to Zillow to their rentals and see what else is there. You could go to Rent-A-Meter also and run a file and they'll give you what the average rents are. And if all of a sudden you find out like, wow, these are way under, we're going to take, I won't say take the like top end dollar of what's going out there, try to take more of the median, and then let's rerun those numbers and see if we're going to get put into the positive. If though these are market rents, this is definitely a bad buy. Okay, so next slide. Oh, it's working now?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Okay. So here's another one where we're looking at purchase price is 170,000. You're getting 30-year fixed conventional at 7.75%. Down payment, so you have to put down 25% if you're doing conventional, not like, so this is a non-owner occupant. And then the taxes for the year, 2816. Insurance, I'm estimating again, $1,200. So right now, the total monthly payment, including taxes and insurance, is $1,248.09. But let's also now include in the other expense of water. So I like to assume based off of 2 bedrooms on each side, about $75 a month per unit. So that's an additional $150 to estimate as an expense. So then when we take the 1248.09 plus 150. Well, you know, my handwriting is not so fantastic there. Now we've got total expenses of $1,398.09. And then what we're going to do is when we multiply that, or actually, no, sorry. Then we're going to take the $1,850 in rents that we're getting, subtract from there, which leaves us at $451.91 in profit just for the month. Then when we times that by 12 to get our yearly, you're going to end up with $5,422.92 for the year. Now you put down 42,500. So let's just assume that this was a great property. There were no fixes you had to make. All you ended up doing was putting down that 42,500. When you take this number and divide it by the 42,500, you're going to come out with a 12.75% ROI. So I would believe that this is a good buy because there's going to be other things that the guys are going to talk about next that also incorporate into, it's not just like this is the cash that you're making up front, but what about appreciation and all the other stuff that the guys are going to get into. But the other thing is I think about too, if you're putting money in the stock market, does anybody know what like the average year-over-year return is?
It's an average of 10% over 10 years.
10% over 10 years. So if you're getting 12.75, so it's higher, seems better. And not only that, your tenants are paying down your mortgage. So now you're building equity. And when you sell it, now you've got that asset. So overall, this is going to be a good buy. All right. So now I'm going to turn over to, is it John or Aaron? Okay. I will erase this. Oh, any questions?
If the monthly expense is not yet included, all the repair and stuff, correct?
So if you are anticipating, so let's say on paper, everything looks good. You go, you check it out, you get an accepted offer, and then you have the inspection. Now the inspection is coming up with some items that need to be fixed. So you're saying, okay, to the seller of it, maybe they'll fix a couple items for you, but there's some other ones that need to be fixed. You're going to then look at like, okay, how much is this going to cost me to fix it? Is it immediate that I need to? And then you'll add whatever that total is onto the total expenses so you'll add on that to like the 25% you're putting down plus those fixes. And then when you calculate what the rents are that you're getting for the year, you're going to divide that by the total expenses. So in the example I gave, I was going as like, this is a clean property, nothing needs to be done to it. At the end of the day, there's always going to be stuff that's going to be done. I mean, you might have a water heater that's 10 years old. It's going to go in the next couple of years. So you're going to eventually over time. So the percentage you see now is never always going to be like exactly that percentage, because when you have to replace a water heater or 10 years down the road, you have to replace a roof, you're always adding to it. But long-term, you'll see the numbers shine when you see the appreciation and the debt reduction and everything else that goes along with it.
And I think you mentioned a very good point, like when the renter basically pay off your mortgage, and then when you can sell those investment, right? That's
Right.
what you get again.
You're getting that equity that they've already started to pay down, and whatever, it is appreciated in value. And two, you also have to consider as well that you're going to increase rents as you go. Because you're not going to just buy a property and then you're going to keep the rent the same. So you're going to increase rents as you go as well.
Are you going to talk about the capital gain tax, whatever, when you sell off this?
Yeah, we'll touch on that.
Okay.
So there's going to be certain stuff we're going to touch on. We won't be able to go in depth because I'm not a CPA. So we'll be able to speak to a little bit about it. But we're going to talk about like ways that you can defer that, just like with a 1031
Just
exchange.
an idea of connection from wing to wing, right? When you got this monthly income and then finally 20 years, 30 years down the road, when you sell,
Yep.
that's house price like this, gain like this.
Mhm.
Okay, what is the pro and con at that point? Just
Well,
pull the picture in.
The big pro will be the money.
No, I'm sure.
Yes, you do have to pay taxes, capital gains, but what you've gained will offset that in a great deal that it still be worth it. So I'm gonna turn over to Erin.
Thank you, Miranda.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday. So I'm Aaron Zieg. I'm with A Plus Mortgage. To give you a little more background beyond just the mortgage side of what I do, we got into real estate investing 12 years ago now. We currently have 6 properties that equate to 15 units. We've had a few others that we've sold over the years. We had a mobile home park up north, up in Crandon for a few years. We had an Airbnb up north on the Wisconsin River. So that kind of goes into our real estate background. To take you all the way back to the very beginning, 12 years ago, and really beyond that, for those who maybe are considering but don't own yet, it was scary for us. Like, I was the excited one, the optimistic one, but even that, it was scary. And we didn't have a ton of money sitting aside. And as Miranda mentioned, it really came down to running the numbers, knowing the numbers, having a defined formula, and not going off of emotion. So to give you a quote that ties into what Miranda went into with calculating ROI, has anybody heard of the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad? Robert Kiyosaki, very, very popular in the real estate investing world. So Robert Kiyosaki's #1 investment rule with real estate is make your money on the front end. We're going to go into 4 quadrants here that are going to break down how you build wealth in real estate. The first quadrant is what Miranda went through, and that's calculating your cash flow ROI. If you skip that one, and let's say something happens a year later, and you're like, I need to sell, and you're not making cash flow, things can get really scary really quick. Let's say you make your money on the front end, meaning you calculated cash flow right, and 2 years later, a 2007 worst case scenario happens again. And guess what? Your renting count, the number of renters just went up. You're not planning on selling anyway. You're making your money on the front end. You know you calculated your cash flow right. You're fine, generally speaking. So that is rule number one, and you're not hearing it from me. I'm quoting Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad on that. I'm stealing it directly from him. So as we get into the 4 wealth building benefits of real estate, I want to touch for a moment on why. On the mortgage side and even in the investment side and in the network and my partner, John, we work with a ton of real estate investors. And even if we're not working with them, we know a ton more. And there's many different reasons why, but there's a lot of overlap. Some of it, to what we heard Miranda say earlier, is early retirement, helping fund the kids' college in 15, 20 years, 10 years, whatever that timeline is, with the cash flow we've earned. Maybe going on more vacations, maybe expanding your lifestyle in some fashion, some way. I don't think I'll ever fully actually retire, but there's gonna become a time where it's, hey, I don't wanna work the amount of hours, so I can focus more on the portions of what I love doing within what, what I do. And, then I'll supplement with the real estate investments. So whatever your why is, I can almost promise you when we go through these 4 wealth building benefits, that we're gonna look at a 1-year scenario, we're gonna look at a 10-year scenario, and then we're gonna compound it all the way to 20 years and show you exactly the compound effect of how this works. So let's jump into it here. So you're seeing 4 quadrants. I want you, by the time you walk out of here today, if you're not familiar with this right now, to know these 4 quadrants so incredibly well that you could be out to dinner tonight with your family and friends, and you could pull out a napkin from the side of the table. You could draw it out and explain it to them very simplistically, because this is exactly how you build wealth in real estate, is with these 4 quadrants. Now, we're going to start again with cash flow. That is what Miranda already broke down and defined for us. As was broken down in some of the questions, or alluded to, I should say. Then there's also the mortgage reduction and appreciation. So the home is generally appreciating every single year. And you're going to see, we're going to use really, really, really safe assumptions that are actually below historic average here. So when you walk out of here, we're not going over the top. We're not going off of recent trends. We're going below long-term trends. And then there's also the tax savings and deferment that was alluded to as well. So let's go into this. On the cash flow side, Miranda just gave us a goodbye example of 12.5%, I believe it was. We're going lower than that. We're going 10%. We are going to assume in this example, and the examples that I'm going to go through today, a $300,000 purchase price. Now that means we're coming with 25% down if we're doing a conventional investment property mortgage on a 2 to 4 unit. So 10% of that, we're assuming year number 1, we're bringing in $7,500 in cash flow based on our spreadsheet, based on our ROI formula that Miranda went into. And we're going to do rental growth, meaning that the rents accumulate each year. They go up a little bit each year. We're going to safely go 3.5%. If anybody has seen rents the last 5 years, they've been significantly higher than that. Now, before I break down to what this is going to lead to here, I do want to touch on actually, no, let's hold that till we go all the way around here. I'm sorry. Oh, the $75,000 purchase price is what I wanted to mention. The $75,000 down payment, some of you may be saying, I don't have that money right now. I don't have that set aside in the bank account. Neither did we. We didn't have it sitting aside either. We bought our first one. We didn't buy at $300,000. We bought a little lower. However, for any of you here right now, anybody online that has a home you're living in right now, if you bought it 3, 4, 5 years ago or longer, you are sitting on a tremendous amount of equity where the home has gone up. The mortgage has paid down a little bit. So what we did, and John is going to touch on this and other strategies in a bit here, we took out a home equity line of credit. We've used that 3 times over at this point. There were 2 years where we bought 3 properties each year, and we maxed out that home equity line of credit. It's kind of a scary feeling at first, like, wait a minute, we're adding debt. No, we're adding cash flow. The cash flow greatly exceeded what the mortgages were. It greatly exceeded what we were putting on our home equity line of credit. And the cash flow we made, along with having some other aggressive strategies, paid that home equity line of credit off much faster than we could have imagined. So I did want to touch on that, and that will be expanded upon a bit here. If we compound this over 10 years, our cash flow has become $124,000 in 10 years. Now, again, that's factoring in that 3.5% rental growth per year. Let's go to appreciation. Appreciation, we're going really safe. If anybody's watched the market the last 5 years, oh, let's stop here for a moment.
Can you explain the definition of appreciation other than the house is thankful?
Great question. So the question was, can we touch on appreciation other than the home is thankful?
Like, what does that mean?
So appreciation means if I bought the home for 300,000, and let's say this next year, the home appreciated by 3.5%, that means the home grew 3.5% in value. So now, a year from now, that home is now worth 310,500. So in 1 year, it's in the investment world, it's called phantom income. I now have another $10,500 in 1 year added to my net worth based on this very, very, very safe 3.5% appreciation rate that we're using. Now, in the last 5 years, the appreciation rate has generally been anywhere from 6 to 10+% per year to tell you how safe we're being. In a moment here, in a future slide, we're going to touch on what the historic appreciation rate has been since 1987. And you're going to see how safe this 3.5% is. Every number we have up here, if you use Miranda's formula on the cash flow side, is incredibly, incredibly safe. So 300,000 in 10 years turns into 423,000. That number would be significantly higher if we're actually using the historic appreciation number. So now we've grown another $123,000 in 10 years. Well, the mortgage reduction is another form of phantom income. That means every year my renters, not me, my renters are paying the mortgage for me. I might be paying it for a month if I have a vacancy here and there, but generally speaking, I'm still not paying it. I'm taking that cash flow, a good portion, or a lot of times all of it, is going into a side business bank account in an LLC's name, as Brian touched on. And if we have a vacancy, it's just paid out of that. I'm not touching my personal assets very much unless I'm buying a new property. But in 10 years, the mortgage has paid down by $36,000 from my tenants. I'm not going to touch on tax savings. We're going to have a brief segment, 101 segment at the end here today. But if I add these three up, now remember, I came on the front end with $75,000. Well, in 10 years, $75,000 turned into $283,000. That is a 378% return. Now, in the stock market, historically, if you look it up, it's anywhere, we heard Amberly say it a little while ago, 7 to 10% on average. If it's 7%, that means in 10 years, my money doubled. It didn't go 4x. You're going to see what happens a little bit here when we compound this over 20 years. So appreciation. Historically, I told you we're going to touch on this a little more. Appreciation since 1987 has actually been 4.8%, not the very safe and underestimated 3.5%. That 1.3% gain is tremendous. It would add a tremendous amount of money. And if you're buying more than one property along the way, which we're going to get into here, it compounds that much more. But we're going, again, very safe here. So we're going to go into some 10 and 20 year examples here of, let's say you're not buying just one property. Let's say you're buying one property every other year for 10 years. So I buy one right now in 2024. In 2026, I buy another one. In 2028, I buy another one. And I get to that 5 and I'm like, you know what? I'm good now. We're just going to stop for the sake of these assumptions. We're going to use the same $300,000 purchase price to keep numbers very simple here and not cloud things. We're going to use the cash on cash return that we did in my first example of 10%. Again, lower than Miranda's example that she did of 12.5% on actual property. We're going to use the same down payment of 25%. So we're coming with $75,000 on each of these properties. And we're doing a 30-year fixed mortgage on each property. And we are going to assume that the rent, but also the expenses that come up and the property appreciation that we talked about are all going up an average of 3.5% a year. So again, we're going very safe on the rents and the property appreciation. We're also going to assume a 5% vacancy in this. And to one of the questions from earlier, we're also going to assume $2,000 per year per property in terms of just other fixes or vacancies or whatever might come up. We want to keep this very, very realistic. So let's go into this here.
From your experience, if a vacancy 5%, like based on your.
Vacancy would mean, a 5% would mean less than 2 years, I'm gonna assume a vacancy per property. Now, I can tell you, we've had properties we bought 6 years ago that have had 0 vacancies. We have others that we have a vacancy once per year. So, I mean, going back 12 years, and we're kind of given a very safe, realistic example here of, okay, if I'm assuming every roughly 20 months I have a vacancy, that's probably very safe. Because I might have one property that has no vacancies for 5 years running, one that maybe has one every year or two. We're assuming on the high end of that, one less than every 2 years.
When you say vacancy, how long are we referring to?
If you are actively managing, and I know you're gonna touch on that, John, so let me backtrack here. The question was, how long are we referring to that vacancy being? John, who you're gonna hear from, my business partner, on a moment here, actively manages his own properties. You're gonna hear from Miranda again, and we ultimately have most of our properties managed for us. You're gonna hear 2 different ways of doing that. If you have a good management company or you're actively managing it, usually it's gonna go no more than 1 to 2 months. If you have a bad management company, or if it goes longer than that, you need to fire them, which we've had to do once before, and get a different management company. Good questions. All right, so our 10-year example here, based on the assumptions we just went through, total cash flow accumulated over those 10 years based on those assumptions, $259,000. A little over that, actually. Total debt reduction, so our mortgages on those 5 properties that have been bought every other year along the way, another $78,000. Total appreciation over those 10 years is $351,000. Again, that's a very safe 3.5% appreciation rate. Our net worth has grown over that 10 years by almost $700,000. Year number 10 alone, because remember, there's a compound effect of this. Every year that goes along, your mortgages pay off a little faster. Every year this goes along, the home value has grown, so the appreciation rate is growing at a higher rate each year. Every year this goes along, your rents have gone up a little bit, so your cash flow is growing. So let's go to year number 10 alone. Year number 10, our cash flow is now up to almost $50,000 a year. You've just created a third income in the household, a legitimate third income that's working for your family. That's called putting your money to work for you. Our debt got paid down in year 10 alone by $15,500. Our total appreciation just in year 10 alone has grown by almost $65,000. In year 10 alone, our net worth grew that year alone by adding all of these up, not even getting into the tax savings and deferments, by $126,000. That's called winning. And we're just getting started. Key takeaway here, $375,000. We've grown quite a bit of net worth there. Let's have some real fun now. Using these same assumptions, years 10 through 20, this starts growing dramatically. Let's stop here.
Is that, excuse me, is this the same 5 properties or you continue?
Same 5 properties. We did not buy any more from years 10 through 20. We are just letting those properties continue to work for us now. Great question. So now those same 5 properties we bought in years, right now, then 2 years later, then 2 years later. So by the end of year 9, start of year 9, we've got our 5 properties. Now we're compounding that over 20 years. Our cash flow after the 20th year, compounded that whole time and accumulated, has grown to $1.3 million. I think we've made our money in the front end. Even if we were wrong, even if the vacancies, to the question earlier of how long are those vacancies? Let's say we had a couple nightmare stories in there where we had to do some fixes. That went beyond the $2,000. Let's say a couple $100,000 we've inflated this year. We're still at $1 million over the 20 years. Total debt pay down. Now this is skyrocketed. Now in 20 years, we've got over $1 million in mortgage debt because every year that goes along, a little less interest is paid and a little more principal is paid. And once we get past the tipping point, principal starts getting paid off at a greatly increased rate. Let's go to our total appreciation that's growing now. Now we're up to over 1.1 million here. So in 20 years, not including the tax deferments again, we're now up to $3.5 million. Let's say I'm half wrong on all of this. Okay, well, I guess I only made 1.7 million 20 years from now. Still winning. Year 20 alone, we've now, that almost $50,000 income we had in year number 10, year number 20, we're now bringing in $135,000 a year just in cash flow. That nice little third income has now potentially, depending on the lifestyle you want to live, you know, you've now got that option to, hey, I want to do an early retirement. I want to reduce my hours. I want to go part-time. I want to travel more. Whatever your why is, you might have gotten there in year 10. I'm confident you're well on your way in year 20. Realistically, you'll probably have continued buying properties with some of this income coming in. And these numbers would be even higher. Total debt pay down in year 20 alone, almost another $100,000. Total appreciation in year number 20 alone, a little over 90,000. Year number 20, 1 year alone from what we did that first 8-9 years, we've grown our net worth in year number 20 alone by over $300,000. We're starting to see the big picture here. Huge takeaway of the day. I bought 5 properties. We used the assumption of 25% on that, which was $75,000 per property. Yes, that scary number on the front end of 5 properties, I came with $375,000, but then I realized it's accumulated over $3 million in net worth over 20 years. That is an 851% return over 20 years. That is absolutely incredible. Can anybody guess what the percentage of millionaires were made through real estate? Pretty high. Anybody want to guess a percentage? 50% was the guess. It's quite a bit higher. 90%. 90% of millionaires were made in real estate. If I didn't just show you exactly how that happens with really safe numbers, and you know, John Warren, we'll hear from here in just a moment, been in the game for about 12 years as well now. Moran and I for about 12 years. We know others that are up to 35, 40 properties that have been in the game for 25 years. These numbers are very real and probably underestimated to some degree. So with that, before I turn it over to John and introduce him, any questions?
Well, I'm still nervous about the 3.5%, even though traditionally the trend has reached that way, because the houses are aging. And I don't think a house lasts forever, so it needs either a lot of work or eventually it's going to be raised and something else is going to be built on the property. So sometimes, you know, I think about that, I'm like, great, am I too late getting in, or am I at the cusp of the end of getting in and riding that wave? I overthink things a lot. And
Sure.
I think, you know, even the new generation, they're not having kids. You know, they're not having the massive kids that, you know, we had. So eventually that's going to be, the demand is going to go drop down quite a bit. And am I overthinking it, or is it just get on now? And
So
Let me go
interest
over that.
rates are higher, even prices of homes are higher. So if at 3.5 and just keep looking it up, I mean, my house that I bought for 300 is going to be worth $800,000. People's wages aren't even gonna pay for that.
Yeah, so I'll answer that with my presentation. So
Sounds
I'm gonna
good.
put that on hold, because
Perfect.
otherwise we're gonna get. too much.
please make sure you remind the group what the question was at that point, so those
Yep.
online know exactly what was asked here.
Okay.
Any other questions before I introduce John? Thanks for asking. There's always these anxieties that we create in our own mind. And I mean, I'm not saying you're right or wrong for, you know, having that anxiety, but other ones are, you know, if you're gonna get into real estate, I can almost promise you, unless a close friend or family member is already in it, they are suddenly the expert. No, I can promise you're gonna get calls at 4 a.m. to change a light bulb. It's not happened in 12 years, and that combined 12 properties, I think, it's not happened once. Stuff does come up, but you know, you hear all these, all these horror stories. When that happens, and I'm not asking you to be a jerk, but you know, hey, thanks for bringing that up. How many properties do you own that you rent out again? Well, I don't own any. Okay, thanks. I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying for all those people that put these fears or anxieties in our head. So with that, I'm gonna introduce John Warren here.
Awesome. Before I introduce myself, I'll answer your question with statistics because I'm a big numbers person. And it's very valid, right? Like. At any,
What was the question again first?
I'll get there,
Okay.
just wait. At any point in history, whether we look at the stock market, whether we look at real estate, everybody has had that same fear for the last 70 years, because 10 years passed and everything doubled. 10 more years passed, everything almost doubled again. We look at gas being a quarter a gallon, right? And then we fast forward 30 years later, and we're looking at 3.25, sometimes as high as 4, etc. So very valid concerns. However, at the same time, income has exponentially gone up in many cases, not for all parties, but as a loan officer, I'm privileged to see thousands of applications over the years, right? And I can tell you that I see many applications where we have 2 people that graduated college and they might make 70,000, and to your concerns, they don't have any children, right? So they have.
Sorry, stay there. Okay, it might be.
Oh,
Sorry, I didn't want it to come over your shoulder and you freak out.
that now.
That's the
but-
one from the other night.
We have more dual working households than ever before in history, right? So if 2 people are making 70 grand a year, now it's 140, right? Whereas, let's say a lot of baby boomers in those generations were single income for the household. So going off your numbers, just to see it, one of the charts you can do, because this isn't in the presentation, is median sale prices of homes. You can actually see a chart directly from the Fed, and it comes from banking data, so it's normally very accurate. So the question was, try to rephrase it as best I can, when everything is so expensive and we have a lot of changes in society, how can we be comfortable with the current purchase price of homes, that we can consider that we're going to continue this appreciation trend, and that rental income is not going to be affected with changes in the household, such as instead of the average household being 4, maybe it drops to 3 or maybe 2. So we'll go over some numbers. 1970, the median price of a home was $26,000. 1980. Sorry, it's hard to actually
Should be about 50.
see a number. 70,000. And that's on the actual year. 1990. 121,000. 2000. $170,000. 2010. And this actually takes into account, like, I'm gonna back it to 2008, we peaked out at the market, right? At 270, but by 2010, we had a decline and we were 220. So between here and here, we went as high as 270 and dropped to that 220. So think that's counting for a major economic shift. One of the concerns that we all have, right? We had the dot-com bubble in the 90s. We had the housing crisis from 2000 to 2010. And then the most recent, and keep in mind, these are national numbers, right? So it's taking into some states that have much higher sale price, but the bigger the data pool, the more accurate the information, regardless, because it's showing a general trend of appreciation. 2020, 400. Now that's an insane amount of appreciation for that period of time. But even if we take away this anomaly, And this anomaly is mainly due to low interest rates, because what did the Federal Reserve do in 2008 to combat the housing crisis? They bought bonds to lower interest rates, to stimulate housing. And what did they do? They kept those low interest rates for over a decade. So we had a lot of people that couldn't traditionally afford a home. Well, when the rate goes from 8 down to 4, a lot of people can afford a lot more home. So that's why we saw this huge appreciation. But in general, we've had wars, we've had multiple recessions through all this. And we have a 50+ year trend just shown right here that it continues to go up. And that seems scary, like how can things continually rise? Other than it's always been that way, like the prices of food, jobs, and what the wages increase. I remember my dad in the 70s, I mean, he didn't make a lot of money compared to what he made towards the end of his career. So, you know, although it's scary, data is what gives us the comfort to move forward, because the hardest part in real estate and investing, or any investment, is getting over our own psychological barriers, right? Like, it is scary. You are investing, you're putting your hard-earned money at risk. And so that's a very scary thing. Even for me, I own, I don't know, 12 properties, and I'm nervous every time I buy one. Sometimes I freak out, like, hey, I don't know how I feel about this anymore, even though I know the principles tried and true. I believe in every concept that was taught by Miranda, by Aaron. I don't think it ever gets less scary, because it's like what I bought for in 2012. It's like, man, I bought that for a third the price I'm paying today. That's a scary concept. But what's different is in 2012, my rent was almost a third of what it is today. So that does change the values, because we're paying so much more, we have to recoup that. So every landlord is increasing their numbers to accommodate with that. So Miranda and Aaron and Brian all went over super important concepts. We have to know our numbers. Like, first and foremost, if the numbers don't make sense, we're all wasting our time. We don't need to protect ourselves legally if we're not making any money. So numbers, super important. Super important that as you grow your portfolios, that you know what risk you are subjected to. That's why we have those conversations on insurance, on legal, LLCs, and those are typically discussions we have a little bit further along than before we own our first one or two, right? As we own more and we have assets to protect, those conversations become extremely relevant. Then we had Miranda go over a ton of numbers based on what makes up our expenses, what makes up the mortgage payment with taxes, insurance, utilities. So we have to know those numbers and have a general concept of how do we evaluate a property. And so what I'm going to go through is not only putting yourself in the proper mindset to be successful and remove that emotion from it and be more data-based and numbers-based, but also how is it possible for you? Because we already know, based on Aaron's example, there's no question you make money in real estate, right? It's not by coincidence that 90% of millionaires own real estate and have done so through real estate. That's not a coincidence. It's a trend. Makes perfect sense when we look at this historical data of 50 years ago, 20-some thousand dollars to 400,000 for a median price. Like, that's amazing. But we can also look at other investments like the S&P 500 that have done similar things. So removing that emotion and looking at that data is super important. So how do you evaluate a property? I'm going to give you an example of a property that I bought 2 years ago now, and kind of go through the numbers as if we're going to rewind the clock to 2 years ago, 2022, and we're going to evaluate this together. And I want to get some feedback on your opinion. So here's the property. It's on 70th in Oklahoma. It's located in Milwaukee. It is a side-by-side property, which is incredibly rare to have a side-by-side ranch in this area. So good luck finding comps, because when I was going through to buy this, that was my biggest concern, because upper lower duplexes had values $30,000, $40,000 less than what I paid for this property. And I was assured by many resources that I trust that what I was paying was 30 to 40,000 under the market for the property. Hard to believe that though, when I can't support it with data, but the absence of data doesn't mean that what we're doing is wrong. Because if there is no comps, then we have to go off of other factors of maybe we expand those zip codes to find a side-by-side ranch to see what other side-by-side ranches have sold for, even though it's a different area. So each side about 900 square feet, 2 bedrooms. They're actually very good sized bedrooms, so not too small. So there's no outlier for poor layout or something. Small kitchen, small bath. I don't know why I put a picture of the door, but just to show like the history of the property, right? Like this building is virgin. It hasn't been touched since 1960 when it was built. It even has that slate tile, that classic red or white oak that we see in so many Milwaukee properties. You know, the windows were updated in this property probably 10 years ago. Other than that, zero improvement. Traditional moldings, same floors. I just refinished the floors, put blinds in, cleaned it, made it look nice. But a lot of people might look at this kitchen and they say, well, we should replace those appliances and we should upgrade that kitchen, right? Put a nicer counter. I mean, that's a boomerang 1970s counter. That's pretty awesome. But you know, as a young investor, I might think, wow, I need to do all this work to the property, right? And so what work do we do to a property and what work don't we do to a property, right? My opinion, if it's clean, habitable, and well-maintained, don't do anything because rarely you can improve the property and recapture your investment in a reasonable amount of time. My general assessment is I have a 2-year policy. If I make an improvement, increased rents, pay for it. So if rent, for example, is 1,000, and we can increase the rent, let's say to 1,400 doing an improvement, I want this extra $400 needs to pay for those improvements within 2 years. If it takes longer than 2 years, you're throwing dead money away because you could buy another property, do other things with your money. So a common problem is over improvement. So going back to this example, you're going to be quite surprised. Oh, wait, I got to go back. What do you think rent was for this property when I bought it?
660.
660?
What did you say the size was on that?
900 square feet, 2 bedroom, 1 bath. You see the kitchen and it's an eat-in kitchen. There's no formal dining room or any of that. What you see is kind of what you get. 1 front room, 1 bathroom, walk-in kitchen. I didn't take a picture of the 2 bedrooms. There is a garage. Detached.
You said 950, Sherry?
It's 660.
Oh,
660?
660?
Yep.
2 years ago.
2 years ago on 60th or 70th in
Hey,
Oklahoma?
better yet, 70th in Oklahoma, based on today's rents, what do you think the rent should be?
Oh, I think it would be more like 950 to $1,000.
Okay, 1,000, anybody else?
I can tell you the old model of doing things doesn't mean it's what's done now. So when I got into the game like 12 years ago, it was $1 per square foot, assuming that the upgrades were, like there were no upgrades, it was just the regular. That was like the common then, and then you go to about $1.35 to $1.50 per square foot for like updated nice stuff. That has now changed, so I'll just give that as a caveat.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, Miranda, to circle back for, how do we take that emotion out of it? So we're not just shooting a hip from the experience we think we have, right? We can go to apartments.com, we can go to Zillow, we can go to realtor.com, we can talk to an agent professional, which is the first and foremost of what I do for every decision, because they have the local knowledge for that market, right? I showed you a bunch of numbers for nationally. I can tell you that the median sale price in the state of Wisconsin was 290,000 last year. Not anywhere near that 400,000. But it did still double because in 2010, the value of the average home was 140,000 in the state of Wisconsin. I like numbers. So going back to this, before I tell you what I did rent it for, the rent was $900 at the time of purchase and 1 unit was vacant. So the numbers, as we can see, the expenses are the expenses Miranda went over, PITI, mortgage, taxes, insurance, utilities, except I don't pay utilities in a duplex, I make the tenants pay it, so that's not accounted for. So we have 2 units, so 900 times 2 gives us $1,800, minus our expenses gives us $426. For ROI is just the cash flow divided by the overall purchase, or we have our cash on cash, which is the cash flow annually divided by how much cash we put into the property to acquire it. In this case, I did 32,000 down. So it would be 426 by that. So this return looks amazing. This return does not look so amazing. And quite frankly, at $426 a month, I would be very nervous for this particular property because it doesn't allow for a lot of air, doesn't allow for vacancy, doesn't allow for standard maintenance. There's other fees that we experience as landlords that aren't encompassed in the taxes, insurance, etc. Just being a property owner. So as we can see, as rent goes up, this property looks more and more attractive. So I'm a cash on cash investor. I want a return on the money I'm bringing to the table. The leveraged money, that's all fluff, because if I'm making a return on $300,000 loan, that's other people's money, right? And that's the power Aaron was showing with principal reduction of the other people's money, which is encompassed in this expense. This is just raw profit after everything's said and done. So I rented that property for $1,400. Then I had more than like 20 applicants. And that was back 2 years ago. So why I show this is for several years, I was in this mindset of old standards like Miranda's square footage standard, like industry standards of 1% rule on rent, or, you know, the square footage, or just for a 2-bedroom, it's X amount of dollars, 3 bedrooms, typically this, like everybody derives a certain way of what they think is fair rent for the property. I can tell you, I've walked away from home runs over the last 14 years because I was in this bucket, right? I'm a buyer, and what do buyers want? They want a deal, and they run everything conservative. Well, as soon as you own the property, what happens as an investor? Now you want your property to be worth the most, and you want the highest rent possible. So completely different hats we wear, going from owner to investigating the property, let's say. So that's why that industry professional is so important, because it removes the emotion from the decision. Real estate should never be an emotional decision. The second it becomes emotional, that's when mistakes are made. That's when we regret. That's when we don't manage the property the way it should be, because we're trying to make something happen that isn't supported by data or a professional. So I'm not gonna go into the appreciation. I did the same factor as Aaron, and I had like a total at the bottom, but we've already seen the power of those items. I mainly want to focus on how do we evaluate a property? And so the takeaway point for this is, if you don't have the right rent income, your analysis is already wrong. Because the property is only expensive if it doesn't cash flow. So it's very scary to think, wow, 400,000 from 220, like, yeah, that's true. But if the cash flow makes sense, it's almost impossible to lose unless you have a catastrophic loss to the property. If the cash flow is wrong and you are bleeding money every month, we're gonna fail, right? We're a business, we're bleeding red. We have to be green. At minimum, black on a bad year. We never want to go backwards. In some states, real estate's so expensive that they do appreciation-based investment. They know they're losing $5,000 a month, but they know that the values are going up. They're taking a risk. I do not believe in that type of investing, because that is speculative, and that's where you get burned, like in the housing crisis. And now when values drop, if I buy this property for 270, but it cash flows, I really don't care that it goes down to 230, other than psychologically, I feel like I lost money. I had no intention of selling. If it would have went the other way, it's not like, oh, now I'm gonna sell either way. I'm doing this as a cash flow investor. And if we start with that mindset, we avoid those emotional decisions.
Good question.
Yep.
I don't, you might have said this, but what are you renting it for today? Is it still the 1,400?
Nope, so today I did have a turnover and we released it 6 months ago for 1650.
So that
So,
53% is now more like.
yeah, that's
60,
a 200,
70% ROI?
so now the numbers are even better, right? And any deal that was mediocre 2 or 3 years ago is normally a home run 2 or 3 years later, because we do have these increases in living expenses because of rent going up, house values going up, all those things actually benefit us as the landlord. So maybe the numbers aren't attractive the moment you buy it, but they still make sense. Know that those numbers are gonna look very attractive once you have your first rent increase. Because $100 a month is $1,200 a year per unit. So if you have 2 units, 2,400, I don't know about you guys, that's still a lot of money to me in a year. So
Sorry,
Now-
on the example you did, just like the one you renting here, how much tax you pay on the annual income?
the annual income, so I do an approach where I accelerate the depreciation, so I normally don't pay any tax on the income for the first 11 years. And I am not a real estate professional, so it only goes against the income from the property. It does not reduce my tax liability on my other incomes. That's getting into a more technical thing, but that's how I choose to do it, to keep my taxes a little bit lower right now during my working years, so when I retire, I won't care about some of those tax consequences later on. So we went over how to evaluate a property from a rent perspective. The price doesn't matter if the numbers make sense, because some other investor is gonna buy it solely on the numbers, not about what the purchase price is. I know that seems crazy, but it's an investment. So who owns a home here? Who doesn't own a home here? All right, perfect. We're gonna go into home ownership, being first-time home buyers, let's say, and some of the programs available, because the best way to start investing is on the first 1 or 2 properties. And the reason behind that is you can buy a 2 to 4 unit property with as little as 3.5% down. It's much smaller barrier to entry than the 25% down or 20% down on a commercial loan to get an investment property. So I always encourage, if people can stomach having a neighbor live in their house, you know, whether it's a side-by-side ranch, up or lower, I say buy as many units as you can afford the first time, because 2 things are happening when you're a first-time home buyer. One, you're getting this low down payment, and you don't have to be a first-time home buyer to get the low down payment. Both of these programs are available to you regardless of how much income you make, and regardless of how much, whether you're a first-time home buyer or not. So the low down payment, super powerful, because we could buy a $300,000 property for as little as like $14,000. That's an affordable number. I could say, hey, I'm gonna cut out McDonald's and Starbucks for the next year and a half. That's a house payment. As crazy as that sounds, because we live in an expensive world. I remember when they had a $1 menu at McDonald's, now it's like $3 for their cheapest thing. It's like, holy frick. Then we're losing to inflation in 2 ways. The product gets smaller and the cost went up. So super powerful because it does 2 things. One, that low down payment. The other part, it reduces your living expense. So if you have a mortgage of $2,500 and you have a tenant paying you $1,400, you're now paying $1,100. Last time I checked, you're not gonna find a quality rental for $1,100 that is gonna check your boxes. Being an owner occupant, you can make that unit your own and bridge that down payment gap and get in the door. And then when you vacate your unit, now you're gonna have 2 units paying you. And so how do we do the assessment of, should we buy an owner occupied rental? Same analysis. We have 2 units or more. And as long as we have cash flow, when all units are rented, it's a good buy, right? Because if I have 2 units getting $1,400 a month, that's $2,800, and I have a mortgage of $25,000. When I vacate that building, I will cash flow. But never buy a building that won't cash flow when you vacate it, unless you're doing it because, like, I gotta be in Shorewood and have a $700,000 duplex that only gets $2,000 a month rent. Does exist. I see people do it all the time. But if you're doing it from an investment standpoint, which is the whole point of house hacking, the numbers have to make sense on the front end. They won't make sense when you live there because you're not getting the rent of the unit you're living in. So you have to look at the reduced living expense as your value prop to start. Now, once you own a property, nothing changes. We do the same analysis. It's just that the financing changes. So how do we make that possible? Well, Aaron talked about when you own a home, we saw the numbers, 1970 to 2020. That's a lot of equity to tap in any 10-year period. We could reduce that to a 5-year period, and you normally have immense equity. So what Aaron was referring to was taking out a home equity line of credit. This is where we get a second mortgage on our house. That's like a credit card. They say, hey, we're gonna give you $100,000 that's available to you to spend however you want. And so for Aaron, he's used his personal HELOC to be the funds to cover that 20 to 25% down required by commercial and residential loans. Because it is a big, go ahead.
No, keep going, I'm sorry, I'll ask it later.
Okay.
I won't forget, I promise.
Because 20 to 25% is a big number. I don't know about you guys, but even if we buy an affordable duplex, let's say in West Dallas for $250, that's a lot of money, right? 25% is that $62,500. So I don't know about you guys. I don't have that kind of money just laying around to buy a property and then another property, another. So we have other avenues we can leverage. One, the equity in our homes. Huge vehicle for growth because we only pay interest when we borrow against it, which is very powerful. So you can open it up so you're ready for the opportunity when it comes. But all cash flow principles must remain. The property must cash flow. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble, right? Because if values go down and we're bleeding money every month, we're going to want to not be a landlord. We're going to call Tanya and say, hey, I know we bought this last year. It's not working. Let's sell it. Now we're going to lose all these transactional costs. None of us want that. We want you to succeed. We want the phone call of, hey, we're ready to buy number 2. This is amazing. You've changed our lives. 2, 3, 4 over the years. So this is one huge way to do it once you have your initial home. And it might mean that you can't do another home for a few years because we need the cash flow from the property we're buying to help restore that HELOC to then afford our next down payment. Other avenues that we have, let's say we do have the money, we have a lot of different loan products available. So we have commercial lending, which I refer to. They typically only require 20% down. Now they have some caveats. They have prepayment penalties. They have more red tape sometimes in order to actually qualify for that loan, but it's available to us and we need to know all the products. So I'm going to circle back to a couple more unconventional things because we can all go to the bank. We know what the down payment is, regardless of interest rate, whether you do commercial or conventional financing like Aaron can help you out with. There's other ways to acquire real estate. In that example that I gave you, I did seller financing or a land contract. Who knows what a land contract is here?
The realtors.
What?
The realtors. The realtor investors.
Yeah. So a land contract is basically where someone sells their interest to you for that property and you give them, let's say, a down payment. In my case, it was 10%. So I give them $30,000. And you get the ownership rights, but they have a contract that says, hey, John, if you don't pay me within 30 days of our payment date, I can instantly take the deed back from you. I go to the court, file the paper, and now that property is mine. And everything you gave me is my money. You lose it all. It's not like a refund. It's like a mortgage, right? You foreclose, they're not going to give you more money just because. Why is seller financing a powerful strategy? How you make it possible as you grow and gain your investments is a lot of people, they've owned real estate a long time and they're scared of those tax consequences that we've all talked about in the presentation. So in my example, that's exactly what this landlord had. He had a huge tax liability because he owned it, right? And he had that massive appreciation. I think he bought the building for $120. he sold it to me for $270. So, and he only owned it for like 10+ years. So for him, he's worried about those taxes because he recently retired and it affects his social security and his pension. Because you can only make so much money for a certain period of years once you retire. So for him, land contract's awesome because although he sold the interest of the property, he only has the tax consequence of the down payment I gave him. The loan or the unpaid balance is not taxable until it's paid in full. So for him, he wanted to defer this for 5 years. So we have a 5-year agreement that in the 5 years they refinance or pay it off. But seller financing is a real concept. I've done it on 2 properties in the last 3 years. I was able to get a reduced interest rate from what the market is because I don't believe in seller financing at a rate that I can get at the bank, because otherwise what's the point? And 2, I never overpaid for the property. I wasn't looking for a home run, but I never overpaid excessively because the numbers have to work. When I do have the bank loan, that is the higher interest rate and all that, just because I get a deal on the front end on interest rate, I have to make assumptions on real numbers. So seller financing could be a very powerful tool, whether you're owner occupied or whether you're looking for your next investment property. And Aaron and I can help you with that. Yeah.
If this is too much of a personal question, you don't have to answer it, but when you do those seller financings, how long is that contract term?
I made mine for a 5-year balloon.
Okay.
You can make it whatever you want. Some people will do like a full 30-year term. I find that hard to digest for most sellers. They want to see an end to the contract. And in his case, after 5 years, there's no consequence other than taxes to him. And his biggest deal was losing his social security and pension income by selling property. So he's just trying to bypass that window of time. I think 3 to 5 years is very realistic. If you're trying to develop terms longer than that, it normally comes at a price, meaning you pay more for the property, you have an unrealistic interest rate, other variables in the equation, but it's actually a very simple negotiation and there's standardized contracts for it. But that's can be a further class. So, we have several ways to make this these properties happen. Your home equity line of credit, we can look for seller finance type transactions. We can get regular loans from Aaron, or we can go to a commercial bank and get a commercial financing. But all of these are powerful tools and all of them are realistic where everybody does this every day. Every one of these is not like an anomaly. Seller financing happens almost every day, bank financing every day. All of them are realistic. And, having that resource, like going to Tanya, she's going to give you the lenders of her preference that she's seen successfully close these deals for you to make sure you're maximizing your terms, but more importantly, that you close, right? Because your terms mean nothing if you can't close. So in summary of everything, it's not always perfect, right? I've had to evict tenants. And as Brian said in the beginning of the presentation, there's a timeline to it. The biggest mistake is not reaching out to your resources as quickly as possible. When he was referring to Milwaukee, there's a very specific way you do your notice. If you don't do it right, you reset your clock. So say we do our notice proper, and then we file the eviction or the court, there's 30 days before they set that court date in Milwaukee, almost minimum. Then they're going to show up with an attorney that is free for them, that files emergency help, just saying they just challenge it, buys them 30 to 40 days. Then you actually have the real date. That's when it's going to happen that you get granted your eviction. But then you need to schedule with the police and the moving company, which could take 2 or 3 weeks to get out there to actually execute what's called a writ, where the sheriff goes and kicks them out of the building. So from notice to final court date, you're normally losing 3 months of rent, assuming you're on your A game day one. Now, a lot of us have big hearts, right? We talked about that emotion. It's very easy. So it's easy to get 2 to 3 months behind thinking they're going to get out of it. And it's not the case. So how do we prevent that? One of my slides, and I know it's missing, but we've learned how to assess a property, make sure we have the resources using the right numbers and the power of that and how to finance it. the most important thing, because we're all gonna start out probably self-managing to a degree, because I believe in the first one or two you need to learn how to be a property manager, is how do we screen tenants, right? So we don't have those tenant eviction issues. So just like a loan, we need to treat everybody the same. And a loan, we qualify based on three things. Income versus debt. Should actually be flipped around. Money. And Aaron, I'm losing it, credit. So for me, I really only care about these two items because we're not doing a hefty down payment, right? You just need to have your security deposit, first month rent. There's a reason tenants are tenants. They don't have a lot of money. So we won't go into the money part of the equation. What we will go into, this is the most important. Because what happens when someone doesn't have enough income to support the rent? You're gonna have a problem every time, without a doubt. So that is one way we remove the emotion, because we might have someone and they're so sweet, they're so lovely, they're respectful. They tell you how they've never been evicted and they've lived at the same place 20 years. But the 20-year place they were at was $700 a month rent and now they're 14. And just because they had a track record of paying on time does not suddenly make a larger payment affordable. So with that, we want it, for me, the rule is 3 times. So whatever my rent is, if it's $1,000 a month, they need to make $3,000 a month. And that can be before all the deductions from the payroll. Because as a lender, we go off of 50%. So you could in theory make $4,000 and have $2,000 home. Credit only matters to me for like 3 things. I care about payments. Because if they have a history of letting cars go away and missing payments, that's normally a red flag. Now, if it's a few here and there, I'm not too worried, because again, they're tenants for a reason. But if they have a history of like cars foreclosing and other things, it's a problem. Evictions, I won't take someone with an eviction. Because I've done it, I made an exception one time. They gave me 3 months up front, double security deposit. Guess who I had to evict? Boom, that person. There's a reason why they have that money. They know they can't qualify and they know they're gonna do it again. Foreclosure, same thing. If you're willing to let your house go, same as an eviction to me. And doing a foreclosure is much harder than an eviction. So like, those are my red flags. But if this makes sense, I can forgive some of that payment history because I at least know they have the money to pay bills as they come. And most people will pay their house before they pay their credit card because they need a place to live. So, Aaron is gonna go into some of these tax savings and, we already talked about the physical asset, but screening the tenants, huge part of being successful in real estate investing.
Maybe it's for another class, after this one, but those 3 criteria, are they disclosed up front to the applicant? To avoid any kind of other, like you're not renting to me based off my race,
Correct. So I do all my applications through Zillow. And the reason why I do that is Zillow allows when someone fills out their information that they can fill out 5 applications. So instead of paying a $30 application fee to 5 landlords, they pay one time. And if I don't accept them, they still can resubmit it 4 more times. On Zillow or any source you're on, you should disclose your requirements for rental. Do you allow animals? You cannot discriminate against emotional support animals or service animals. And if you ever feel gray about it, don't take a chance. Assume favor to the tenant because you will get screwed 9 out of 10 times. You can talk to Brian about it. But I kind of lost. Give me the question one more
Well,
time.
I think what you're saying
No,
is
I get it.
your criteria of how much money per whatever, I don't. Like, I have the criteria, you as a landlord need to set your criteria. So if someone comes at you and say like, I think you falsely denied me,
Yep.
you've got your criteria, because you don't have to give a reason to why they denied them. If you are denying them based off of credit, then you have to supply that credit report to them. But certainly I don't say this is what it is, because if they feel like they met it and then they have a cause for it, like it can be a problem.
Also, there are services, through some of the education classes I've taken on this, I use, TransUnion Smart Move. So I never see the application. It goes through the third party and then they give me a score.
Hmm.
And rent, no rent sort of thing. So I don't see the application and they just go off of
And,
data.
and Zillow always provides a background check and credit report, and they supply that to the consumer, so you don't have to worry about like that type of red tape.
All right. Am I next? All right, in the essence of time, because we are running short, so property management, well, I say I started out managing our own properties, it became a lot once we got more. I did go through the free landlord training class with Milwaukee. I would recommend that. You do get the huge book that Brian was talking about for Madison, it actually comes with it. But certainly, a lot of information there. The difference is no property management, they're not all the same. And so it is really important to do due diligence and ask questions when you are looking to have someone manage it, because you are paying. So how much, what's the percentage that they're taking from the rent? When there's a new tenant, what is it, a percentage or half the rent for that application? Renewals, what's the renewal fee? So and then also too, what are all the services that they provide? Do they have a maintenance staff? And, I had one where I've got one right now, they gouge me on maintenance. So I actually have my own contractors. Every time they send me the estimate, they make money on turnovers. And so as soon as they're like, oh, you need to do X, Y, and Z, they show me the pictures. I'm like, no, I don't want that done. No, that doesn't need to be done. Like, I do not need to repaint the property every year. So, factoring into, and then how do they actually, I've got one property management that's awesome. As soon as the tenant tells them, I am not renewing my lease, they go in, they look at what needs to be done, and then they start showing that property while that tenant's living there, saying, hey, we're going to fix X, Y, and Z when they move out, and they start getting applications right away. So I do not have those vacancies. It is a seamless transition. I've got another company, which we just fired. They don't do it until after the tenant has moved out. So now tenant moves out, they go in, send me pictures, say, we need to do this, and we can start that work in a month. So now I've lost a month of rent. Then they're going to do the work. Then they're going to advertise it. And then by the time someone comes to rent, that's probably another 45 days later. I'm out 3 months. It's a terrible, terrible way to do it. So as soon as you know a tenant is leaving, if you're managing yourself, you have those rights within the contracts, the leases, to be able to start giving notice to go and show prospective tenants. So definitely just as far as the management side, for me, it was a timing thing. I just needed to take some things off my plate, but we're always learning, and I'm even learning too which management companies I like and I don't like. So I can always tell you those, but their Google reviews will also set that apart as well. So if tenants are constantly hating them and there's very other people like property managers saying they like them, it's probably a red flag. But slide on to Aaron for tax strategies.
All right. I want to start off by saying, none of us are tax, legal, or accounting advisors. Obviously, Brian spoke earlier on the legal side as he could. So I'm up here representing the tax side. I got really gung-ho into this about 5 years ago, when the world shut down. Everybody remembers that, of course. I sat in on an 8-hour webinar, read a couple books on it as well, and I'm going to share some of what I learned. We actually paid this particular tax advisor for an hour of their time to go aggressive and make sure it wasn't going to catch up to us. I'm going to share that tax advisor's name. Jot down the name Mark Kohler, just like Kohler Company, Mark Kohler. He's got 7 books, a weekly radio show. He runs a CPA firm out of 4 states around Utah. And he also runs the tax and legal side of things out of that area as well. We paid both him and we paid Brian a couple times, who spoke earlier, to make sure that if we are going to go aggressive and we get audited, it's not going to come back. Then we talked to Tanya and others and we interviewed 12 different CPAs and found one that specializes in all these strategies as well. Tanya uses the same tax guy. So it's having that right network. And fortunately, Tanya, Miranda, Amberly, all the different agents in this company have access to that network. So very quickly here, I don't want to waste too much time, but again, there's the 4 different quadrants. Again, I want you to know this so incredibly well that you can jot this down at any given point and understand how you build wealth. We're not going to touch on all of these again. We are going to focus on the tax savings. Tax savings and deferment from the start can save you at least another 3.5 or save you that money and build at least another 3.5% ROI in year 1, and it grows from there. We're going to go into that here. So to simplify this down, there's really active income and passive income. Who here is a W-2 employee right now? I am as well. So whether you're W-2, who here is a sole proprietor, runs their own business? Doesn't matter. You're on the left side of the quadrant. It's active income. You're paying taxes on that money. On the right side, we've got our passive long-term income. This is investments. This obviously would include long-term rental properties and even more of our short-term vacation properties or things of that nature if we're doing Airbnb. So let's go into the big difference here. If I'm a W-2 employee, I'm gonna have my income, I'm gonna pay my taxes on that income, and I'm gonna pay my expenses after my taxes. I'm not getting it pre-tax. So as a W-2 employee, I'm paying my gas money after I paid my taxes. The money comes back to me afterwards. If I need a new computer for work, I'm paying for that after my taxes. If I'm adding some new things at home to build my home office, to help me where I need to work from home as a W-2 employee sometimes, which I do a lot, I'm paying for it after my taxes. You get the point. And after all of that, that's what's left. As a real estate investor, I've got my income, then I get to pay my expenses before my taxes. This creates a huge, huge difference of what I'm paying in taxes. And essentially, with the tax deferments, I'm not paying anything for an incredibly long time if I'm doing it right. So to quote Robert Kiyosaki again, that's the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, amongst many, many other books and workshops that he's got. The only tax break most people get on this side of the quadrant is to buy a bigger house and go into greater debt. Okay. Doesn't sound all that exciting. Let's look more so on the other side. So how do I save this? I already mentioned, gas. If I'm a real estate investor, every single time I go to the property, every time I'm looking to buy a new property, when we bought ours, it's rare that we went and looked at one property, signed the dotted line the next day, and we're done. We looked at quite a few of them. Well, that added up a lot of gas. Really wasn't that much, but it added up miles. We got to write all of that off. Every time we drive past the property, so if I'm on that side of town, I happen to drive past, check out the outside of it, I get to document that. I'm writing that off. I now get to write off my phone. I now get to write off my new computer purchases. If that's not enough, we get to go into the big D, depreciation. This is another huge form of phantom income. So let's say the way depreciation works on residential real estate, investment real estate, is we're depreciating over 27.5 years. So if I have a $275,000 purchase, just to keep the numbers nice and round here, divide that up, that's $10,000 per year. That gets to be deducted for that first 27.5 years in depreciation.
I
Yes.
think this kind of goes maybe to the question of what you were asking about buildings degrading over time and whatnot. This is kind of like what he's saying. Part of it, like you get a tax break on that, sorry.
No, it was just the question that was asked earlier about, like the fears of like, can it keep growing this way? Well, you get the depreciation benefits in this scenario as an investor. So now the very first example, well, the first couple examples we gave you, we were making about $7,500 a year. Our depreciation, not even factoring in the mileage, the phone cost per month, buying that new computer, additional things we could write off. Just the depreciation alone means I'm paying nothing on that real estate income. I'm deferring it for quite a while. I'm kicking the can down the curb. And we went 20 years. We didn't even get to 27 and a half years. 20 years down the road, we already now we're making 130,000 per year, I think it was. Just in cash flow alone, not the debt reduction, not the appreciation. So I've had the question before, well, aren't you scared of that then? There's ways I can defer it in different ways, which we'll touch on today. We're not going to get into the advanced 201 stuff. But by that time, I feel like I've made an incredible amount of wealth. I'm not as concerned. I'd rather build that wealth in the short term. I want to go back for a second. I've got it on here about the accelerated depreciation that John talked about. We do that as well. We can guide you to certain CPAs that specialize in this. If you're literally going to buy a property every year or two or more, that could be a great strategy. If you're buying one and then you're buying another one 5 years from now, you probably don't need to accelerate into depreciation. You're probably getting enough just with your other write-offs alone. I want to briefly mention that. So there is an eventual downside. Eventually this time has come up and we have to pay on it. There's a couple different ways we can do that. The first one I'm not going to go into. I'm not an expert on this by any means, but the second one, I'm going to turn it over to Miranda here and she's going to touch on a 1031 exchange that is really common.
All right, so I'm just going to talk about it on the real estate perspective as someone who's helped clients use a 1031 exchange. But the attorneys I work for have also told me that I need to say I am not a 1031 exchange intermediary, so I am not an expert in this field. And at a later date, we will have one to go into that more 201 type stuff. But basically, let you own a property, a single family home, and you want to now buy we're going to make this a four family property. So what you're doing is the big word is defer. We want to defer the capital gains because if you sell this property, you're going to pay capital gains on that property. And there's ways to, your CPA will help you too if you do just sell it, like with any improvements you made to figure that out. But let's say you don't want to, you're trying to defer the capital gains for as long as possible. You're going to do what's called a 1031 exchange, and you're going to roll it into this property. So when you set this up with an intermediary and closing day happens on this property here, all of the proceeds, every single cent is now going to go into an intermediary fund by the 1031 exchange, and it sits there. You now have 45 days. So from the time this closes, money goes into there. You have 45 days to locate another property and go under contract. And once you're under contract, you have 180 days to close on it. Now, when you're buying a four family, you're probably going to close in like 60 or less. It's really if you were going from like a four family to a large commercial property, those do take longer. But you have 45 days to close on it or to locate this property, then close on it. And then that money is paying for the down payment on this. Of course, if you do need to bring some more money to the table, that might be a factor. But now that exchange has happened. This is done, you've exchanged for this, and you're deferring that capital gains into this property. But again, you have to, that's where the expert will come in on what's a like kind exchange. It's not like I can go own an 8 family and then say, I want to buy a lake rental for me to stay at, but I'm going to Airbnb it a couple weekends a year. Not going to be a like kind exchange. That's not going to work for you to defer that. So you're usually got to go like similar to similar or stepping up, never really stepping down. So that's just the basics of the 1031 exchange. And what happens is if you don't locate a property in that 45 days, then that money in that account goes into your account. So you did pay that 1031 exchange. So you're going to be out the money you paid. It's like $1,500. But that money goes back into your account. And now you're going to be back to your CPA paying capital gains. So that's how a 1031 exchange works.
And what is the capital gain rate? Tax rate?
Good
That's a
question.
question for your accountant.
Yeah, because it differs. It differs. That'd be a CPA one, which we'll be having another session where we're gonna bring in a CPA too. Okay.
All
Is that
right.
it, Tanya?
Great. Sorry that we are running over you guys. I'm gonna go really, really fast. So just, how can a realtor help you throughout your, yeah, we'll blame the attorney. Okay, so obviously we can help you locate your properties. There are on-market properties and then there are off-market properties. So we have a huge team of 10 agents. Every week we share what properties are out there that might be coming to market, try to put together private sales for those. We network with a number of agents in the industry as well. So we can oftentimes find off-market properties for you. Help you obviously negotiate your contracts. We have a huge database of contractors that we've worked with that are trustworthy. We can make those recommendations, determine rent amounts. I like to use something called rent range. I will do that for my clients. It's not very expensive. So I'll run those reports for you, which also your lender will love because that report goes into so much detail on average vacancy rates, et cetera. So we can do that for you. Provide updated property valuations. So if at some point you think I want to take a HELOC against this rental unit, we can help you identify how much equity you possibly have in that property. And then also we had someone online that wanted information on preparing a property for sale in case you want to do a 1031 upgrade. And we can help you with that as well. That's a complimentary service that we will come in and help you identify how not to over improve your property when you're getting ready to sell it. So, all right. Any other questions? Anything in the Zoom? All right, so we will have a recording from today's session that you'll all get. It'll also be posted on our website and on our YouTube channel. I will email you the slides, so you'll have those. The survey will get emailed. Do you want to hand the survey out here?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
And then, oh, and the attorney document with all the live links will get emailed to everyone else as well. So please provide your honest feedback to help us make these better. And once we later in the year get our advanced investment session ready to go, you'll all be aware. So thank you again for spending your morning with us. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.